you all so much for coming tonight. I'm really aware of the fact that it's always a trade-off with other things in your life that you could be doing, and that this is not an easy subject to talk about, but it is a subject that we really need to talk about. Suicide kills 10 people a week in New Zealand, which is a number 50% higher than the road toll, and 10 deaths a week in anybody's language is an epidemic, but this one is surrounded by silence. And Deb and I, having lost children to suicide, have gone through the process that every family goes through when they experience a sudden and unexpected death, which is a desperate need to understand why. And so for 2.5, almost 3 years, we've been conducting research to try and understand what on earth happened to make our normal, healthy, loved and loving children make the decision to take their lives. And we work alongside people like Steve, who's been doing this work for 20 years, and other families who have experienced exactly the same pain and trauma that Deb and I have, who have been working for years. The information that we've gathered over the last 2.5 years is information that we believe, had we had it, our children could still be alive today. And so while many days we wake up in the morning and we would like to just pull the duvet over our heads and never get out of bed again and have to live in a world where our children are not with us, we feel an obligation as mothers, as family members, as members of the community and as human beings to share with other people the information that we have learned too late, so that other people might be prevented from going through the tragedy that is suicide.
Want to get some slides going?
That would be great. I said before that there's a lot of silence around suicide. And that's mandated by legislation. The information that we get about suicide as New Zealanders tends to be filtered through SPINS, which is an agency funded by government and sits beneath the Mental Health Foundation. SPINS is Suicide Prevention Information New Zealand. And on their website, this is their stated purpose. And this is the information that we're currently being given. We're being told that in comparison with other countries around the world, we have a moderately high rate of suicide, but that the rate is has fallen 19%, and that we should be patting ourselves on the back pretty much and saying we're doing a pretty good job in preventing suicide in New Zealand. That is information that the research Deb and I and Steve and many other people have done about what's going on in New Zealand that we completely refute. We in fact have the highest rate of youth suicide in the OECD. It has not fallen by 19% in many groups in the New Zealand community, and there is absolutely no way that we should be patting ourselves on the back and saying we're doing a good job in this area in New Zealand. This is information that was released by the Chief Coroner in 2007. It's the latest stats that he's produced on sudden and unexpected deaths in New Zealand. And what it shows is that suicide is by far the leading cause of sudden and unexpected death. The other categories which may be difficult to read are vehicle accidents, drownings, head injuries, homicide, sudden infant death syndrome, alcohol, workplace accidents, air crashes, boating accidents and farm accidents. Now if you've watched the news over the last year or so, you'll be aware that the government has put a lot of attention on this one down here, farm accidents. They want to introduce tighter regulations around quad bikes on New Zealand farms. We have special teams of investigators for air crashes. There's special teams of investigators for workplace deaths. There's an awful lot of focus on alcohol as a cause of sudden death. But we don't have any of that around suicide. And, you know, as you can see, that's a far more prevalent problem.
That will probably increase too if you count the number of people that commit auto-suicide, because that's not reported as suicide.
There are, and you're absolutely right, Lynn, the World Health Organisation says that the international statistics on suicide are notoriously unreliable. We know that we undercount suicides in some countries by as much as 200%. In countries like New Zealand, the estimates are around 16 to 30%. And the reasons for that are the way we collect data, the fact that there is no standardised protocol for coroners in determining what is a suicide and what is an accidental death, that people who deliberately drive a car into a median barrier and the police say no evidence of them trying to apply the brakes are not classified as suicides, they are fatal road accidents. And another emerging cause of death is suicide by cop, where people deliberately put themselves in the line of fire with the police, and that's not reported as a suicide either. An example would be my son committed suicide by hanging and left no suicide note, so didn't make any clear intention that he wanted to die. The coroner didn't even consider my son's intention. He said, death by hanging, this is a suicide. My girlfriend Leonie's son did exactly the same thing, but the coroner said there is no suicide note, and I'm not sure that the Prozac he was on didn't cause him to do this, therefore her son's death was not classified as a suicide. So there's differences between different coroners and the way they classify deaths. When SPIN says that the figures are decreasing by 19%, they deliberately take the high of 1998, which you see as a bit of a blip, and they calculate from there. Internationally, what they say is, particularly in a small country like New Zealand, fluctuations of quite small numbers can produce quite dramatic increases or decreases over short periods of time. So the important thing is to take a 10 or 20 year horizon. What we've done here is looked from 1985 to 2009. And as you'll see, that while SPINs are telling us that suicide is under control and decreasing by 19%, over that period of time, you'll see that the line is most definitely trending up when you smooth out the changes. This slide shows the discrepancy in information being provided between the Chief Coroner in New Zealand and the Ministry of Health and SPINs. This is the graph that SPINs tells us represents suicide in New Zealand. In 2007, they said there were 483 suicide deaths in New Zealand. The Chief Coroner, whose job it is to investigate suicides, said, no, actually, there were 541 deaths. But the information that makes the media and is our official statistics is this line here. Personally, I have a lot more confidence in the statistics produced by the Chief Coroner. But you know, it just shows that in New Zealand, the information that we have is variable and unreliable. One of the things that happens is that we used to have a youth suicide strategy, and we used to have quite a focus on youth suicide. The government decided to move to an all-ages strategy. So now when we get suicide information, it's aggregate data across the whole community and all ages. What we do at CASPER is we pull out the data for specific groups within the entire population. It'll come as no surprise to anybody that when you report on the data across New Zealand, what you're really looking at is the data for Pākehā New Zealand, because the numbers are so high.